Joe Springer. Where's Joe at? Joe Springer, as you all know, is our Sergeant at Arms, and he's going to introduce our visiting Rotarians and guests. Joe?
Very good. I was going to slip out.
I know you.
Well, greetings, everyone, and thank you for coming to the meeting again this week. I didn't see anyone had signed in, but I did notice that Jerry Kelly had come into the meeting. Jerry, how are you? And is there anyone else that came in for the meet after it started, didn't sign in? Okay, very good. We have nothing else to report, sir. Let's just keep hustling this thing along.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm really glad you're here, Joe. I'm really, really glad you're here. I would have had to done this whole thing myself today. All right. So today's speaker is going to be introduced by our own Michael Corrigan Jr. Mike, stop chewing. Where's Mike at? Did he leave? Oh, here. I got a word for you, but I don't want to say it in front of your dad and your sister. Yes.
Good luck.
The last part of it is all your life. You can fill in
The first part.
Let me take this and you do what you got to do.
Thank you, Mr. President. As a past president of this club, when you stand up here and things like that start happening, you're just like, is this ever going to end? So great job, Tim. I appreciate you. Fellow Rotarians, great honor today to introduce our speaker, Michael Bender from University of North Florida. You know, I asked him, for a bio, and he sent me some stuff, and then I realized that it was useless. So I'm going to avoid most of it. But anyway, he's a great friend of mine. We've been friends for a number of years. If you don't know me, I'm a reforming politician. I was in office from 2003 to 2018. I'll never get fully reformed. But back when I ran for office the first time in 2002, if you had enough money and when you're fundraising, you would do some polling. Well, that's changed drastically over the years. Now you would not run without doing polling and constant polling almost. But and when people think about University of North Florida's Center for Polling, they think that's all they do, is they just help politicians get elected and they do polling from them. The reality is it's tremendously more than that. If you think about beer, and most of the guys in the room think about beer on a regular basis, more taste, less filling would not have happened with light beer if it had not been for polling that was taking place prior to the launch of that marketing campaign. Almost everything you do is polled, and they ask you beforehand and they ask you what you think afterwards. And that doesn't happen in a vacuum somewhere. It happens at leading universities around the country, happens at private companies. But super proud to tell you that at the University of North Florida, where Michael Bender is a professor of the Department of Political Science, he's also the faculty director of the Public Opinion Research Lab. And that lab is doing work and I'll let Michael describe it, but they're one of the leading opinion labs in the country. And we're super lucky to have that lab here in North Florida, and super happy to have our speaker today, Michael Bender, leading. So Michael, welcome.
Thank you, and thanks for having me today. So as Mike talked about, the Public Opinion Research Lab at UNF does do a lot of different things besides just polling. And if you want to throw the slides up, we can kind of walk through a little bit of the things that we do there. And yes, the attention that we get is exclusively the political stuff. And yeah, we're going into the field in a couple of weeks with the state of Florida poll, and we'll be doing the local congressional districts as well. But there's so much else behind the scenes that we do, organizations that we work with, and Michael alluded to some of those. But that's really the bread and butter of our organization. And actually, as a lot of you guys know, right, there's things that you do that pay the bills. And then there's things that you do maybe on a Wednesday for lunch that don't really pay the bills, but maybe get more of the attention. The polling stuff is our attention getter, and it's only a piece of what we do. So if we kind of advance a couple slides here. Yeah, just kind of work through and get those up there. Perfect. Yeah, like this is just an example of some of the organizations that we've partnered with over the last couple of years, whether it's the private sector, whether it's government agencies like JSO or the State Department of Transportation, or other academic centers. You may have heard of Siena. They partner with the New York Times and do a ton of polling. We're calling for them in a couple of hours. We've been calling for them, for a few years now. And then we also work with private organizations, nonprofit centers, and then also the public, whether it's the media or other local organizations. We work with a ton of different people doing a variety of different things. So yes, the political stuff gets the attention, but it's a lot of the other stuff that we do as well. So just kind of to toot our horns a little bit, we are the 13th ranked polling institution in the country. That's not just Florida. That's not just Jacksonville. That's the United States of America. We are ahead of, and this is based on accuracy and transparency in our political polling. So we are ahead of somebody like a CNN, and we are close behind places like New York Times and ABC. We work heavily with the New York Times. So, I think that's a pretty good indicator of the work that we do and where we're at situated. And I think that's a great boon for Jacksonville to have this entity locally for us. Go ahead. So next up, there we go. I do want to talk a little bit about the political polling and polling in general, because who here has seen a poll in the last couple of weeks? Who here has seen polls that maybe contradict each other a little bit? Right. And it's important to understand, much like any other company out there in the world, two companies can do the same thing and make the same product, and you could have two very different outcomes, right? People build houses here, right? There's a difference between a custom built house that takes 2.5 years to build and kind of a builder's grade that you can shoot up in 3 months, right? Still houses, but two very different outcomes. And same thing with polling. There's a lot of different ways that you can get information from people. And I'm not going to talk in depth about the math and the statistics behind polling and the theory of all of that, but just different methods of contacting people. So live callers, people call you on your phone, cell phone traditionally nowadays. There's a person on the other end of the line. You say hello, they say hello, and you have a conversation. That's expensive, right? It costs money to put that person behind a telephone. That's very expensive. Other ways, IVR. So maybe you get a call to your phone, and it's automated and it tells you to press 1 if you like something or press 2 if you like something. Those are really cheap to do, easy. Email invite. Every now and then you go through your emails, you get these invitations to answer some surveys. And I'm not talking about the political advertisements that are fundraising, acting as surveys. I'm talking about actual surveys that they exist in the email world too. Texting, we're seeing more and more of that on our phones, right? People will text you a link and ask you to answer some questions. You can go 2 ways. You can go to the link, the text to web, or sometimes you can go back and forth on texting. Oh, I answer this question, I answer that, and you have a little text conversation. Or you could do a postcard. So you get a postcard in the mail, there's a little QR code on it or a link, and you can go there and you can fill that out. Or you can do panels, whereas you're a member of a panel, and that panel asks you to fill out a number of different surveys on a variety of topics over time, and you get paid small amounts of money to do that. All of those things have different advantages and different costs. Primarily, money is the big differentiator between these, but also representativeness. If you're drawing inferences about populations, and in the political world, we're trying to figure out, who's going to get the most votes, 3 weeks, a month, a year from now. You want to make sure that the group that you're sampling looks like those people that are going to be showing up and voting on a given election day. Or if it's about registered voters because you have a care about a policy issue or whatever it happens to be. The trick is some of these things are maybe better or worse at getting representative samples, right? If you think about panels, it's a very small group over time that may not be reflective of the population writ large. If you're thinking about an IVR situation, oftentimes those are limited to landlines. It's more coming up on cell phones now, but traditionally it's limited to landlines. Think about who has a landline and who uses a landline nowadays. That's a very narrow band of the population. If you're thinking about email invites and online panels, right? Those are limited folks, right? Not everybody uses them. Not everybody uses it equally. Even phones and live callers for that matter, right? People don't often answer their phones if they don't recognize the phone number nowadays. That becomes harder and harder for us. But all of these are different methods to try and get groups of people that look like the entire population, because you can't talk to or get information from the entire population. There's just too many people. It doesn't make any sense. Next up. Now, if you can get your sample to look like the population, this work is pretty easy. The political world, that becomes exceptionally more difficult, because we're caring, not only are we dealing with non-response and people not answering and making sure we get our sample to look like our population, that's real, and that's a struggle. Not only are there margins of error around our estimates that the media never talks about, because we're sampling 500 or 1,000 people and we're drawing inferences about 10 million people. If you think about drawing your hand into a deck of cards, perhaps, right? And you kind of pull out a card, over time, you might draw that Queen of Hearts, but you're not going to draw it every week unless, it's here this week and you draw it every week. You might think the whole deck is Queens of Hearts, but you drip your hand in, maybe one day you get a few more Republicans, maybe one day you get a few more Democrats, and there's some variation around those estimates. That never gets talked about in the press, so you have that to contend with. But the biggest problem that we as pollsters face that is more difficult to overcome is figuring what this population's actually going to look like, because we don't know. I have no idea what turnout is going to look like in November of this year in Florida, in any local area or nationally for that matter. Now, we can lean on some history and make some estimates, based on our history, what turnout might look like. But you have to think about the political map that you're in. Florida, for example, if you guys have been here in Florida for any number of years, you remember when Florida was a battleground state. Think back to 2000 and even 4 and 8, very close races. If you want to think back to some gubernatorial and Senate races that were decided by, thousands of votes, not hundreds of thousands of votes. Heck, just, 4 or 6 years ago, that was the case. That is not the case in Florida today. Florida has changed. Partisan registration has moved from +2 or +3 Democrat to +4 or +5 Republican. That's an enormous swing. And that's going to change what turnout actually looks like on election day, because there's so many more Republicans here. Also, idiosyncratic elections can have a big impact. If we think back to 2022, Ron DeSantis had this enormous victory, wins by almost 20 points. It was not because a whole bunch of people in Florida decided Ron DeSantis was great and they went and voted for him. It was because Democrats didn't show up. Traditionally, in these off-cycle elections, low 60% of Republicans will turn out to vote. Democrats, it's a little bit lower, maybe it's 60%. It's a few percentage points lower. In 2022, it was in the low to mid 40s percentage of Democrats. Democrats did not show up. That's why DeSantis won by 20 points. It's hard to know that in advance that you're going to have this weird idiosyncratic election where things are going to go crazy and Democrats aren't going to show. Those things make this whole process much more difficult. Next slide. So our last pre-election poll in 22, we had DeSantis +14, Rubio +11, and then locally we had Waters +5. Of all the political polls that were done in the state of Florida, we were the best and the closest. And we were still off by 5 points because of that Democratic turnout was so much lower than anybody possibly expected, right? We leaned on our 2018 and 2019 turnout models locally. We used 2022 registration numbers. But who ultimately showed up was different than what anybody really could have predicted. So those things that are different and impactful, we were off by a lot on those, even though we were the best that there was. Next up. So just to give you a sense, right, DeSantis is at 19, Rubio's at 16. We were at 14 and 11. Moody ended up at 21. We were at 14. Simpson was 19. We were at 5. Like we were really off on that one. But even the local congressional district, we had Bean at 12. We ended up by 21. Waters was twice that again because there just were no Democrats in the electorate that we thought were going to be in the electorate. Next up. Now, there's a lot on this slide, and I want to apologize in advance for that. But this highlights a little bit about what we did in 22, and you can map that onto what other polling organizations are doing now for given states or even nationally. If you want to know whether or not you can trust a poll, you're going to have to do some homework. Yes, it's great if they have good ratings on 538, but you want to see what they're doing behind the scenes. What does their sample look like? What are they projecting the population of interest to look like? So for us, we had DeSantis at 14 and Rubio at 19. It was 1916. But for our party registration, we estimated to be Democrats at 36.5, Republicans at 41.8, and the NPAs at 21.7. So an R plus 5 advantage. Turned out it was R plus 12 and a half. I mean, that is fundamentally different. And registration at that time was even. It wasn't a circumstance where, Republicans were that far ahead. Also, the racial makeup, we estimated it to be 67% white, 13% black, 14% Hispanic, 6% other. It was 71% white, 10% black, 13% Hispanic, 6% other, right? So the increase in the white vote, the drop in the African-American and Hispanic vote, like those are big differences. Age, those are different age categories. So we have 18 to 24 is the first category. So we estimated at 5. It turned out to be only 4% of the vote. Then it's 25 to 34, et cetera. The last one is the 65 plus. We estimated it to be 35% of the electorate. Turned out it was 40% of the electorate. Old people still show up to vote. But other folks did not. Those are things that are important to consider. In Florida, for example, we break things down for our election cycles, not only by media market, but we slice Miami out of the Miami media market. So that gives us 11. And then we also factor out some of the high education counties within the media market. So we have 18 different strata that we sample to in the state of Florida. Most other places will do 3, maybe they'll do 4. So we make sure that we have enough Hispanics in South Florida. We have enough people in the Panhandle, all those sorts of things. All right, next up. So we had a poll come out in July, end of July, early August. We're going into the field October 7th. So it'll probably out that following week, maybe the 16th or 15th or 17th, somewhere like that. That'll be our next statewide. We had Trump +7, Scott +4. And the 3 ballot measures, we had the school board, which is Amendment 1. So making school board races partisan again. We had that 37%. There was a fair amount of don't knows, but I'd be shocked if that thing passed. And then we had Amendment 3 and Amendment 4 at 64 and 69% yes. And I've been telling people I've been doing a lot of media over the last 2 months. These numbers are asterisked, and they're asterisked for a reason. All that happened, and I said this then, before opposition campaigns started. The governor is running an active campaign against Amendment 4, and he's doing somewhat of a campaign against 3. But there's money in these on the no side, and oftentimes that can bring down those numbers. I'd be shocked if the numbers that we pull in 2 weeks are close to this. I think they'll both be close, but I don't know if they'll be over 60. All right, next up. This is our demographics for the sample. So we have Republicans +6, 41 to 35 with 24% independents. And if you're looking at polls, that breakdown's important. Yes, the partisanship is important to make sure you have the right R's and D's, but it's also important that NPA makeup, how large that is. I was looking at a poll that came out the other day that had Mucarsel Powell. She was down a point to Rick Scott. I don't believe that to be true for a lot of reasons. But if you look at the makeup of the sample, their sample was 29% made up of independents. And of those independents, she was winning by 10 points. Well, that's nice, but it's also true that you're not going to get that many independents in the electorate. Yes, if you look at registration, there might be that many independents, but NPAs turn out disproportionately less than Democrats and Republicans for a wide variety of reasons. So folks that don't know that are including too many of those, and they might lean more toward McCarcel-Powell in this case. Same thing with our race and ethnicity, right? We're looking at 12 and 17 for Black and Hispanic. You know, that might be different, right? You know, maybe Kamala Harris can, you know, invigorate the top of the ticket, and you can see an increase in the African-American turnout. We'll see, right? We went into the field a week, you know, the week after that all that happened in July. Now, you know, a month and a half later, things have settled down a little bit. We might get a better sense. Maybe that turnout number moves a little, and that changes our estimates some. But these are all really behind the scenes things that you're looking at that you're never going to hear discussed on TV because you have 30 seconds. You're not going to see it discussed in depth in the New York Times or in the Times Union because they don't have the space to do so. But these are things that you can find if you go look at the crosstabs that are posted on the website when these polls are released or those sorts of things. But it requires you to do a little bit of the heavy lifting. Slide up. So what can you do when it comes to polling and educating yourselves and being able to trust things or look skeptically at things and discount them? One is, you know, educate yourself. Who conducted the poll? You know, that's important. If you've never heard of them, that's maybe you think twice and find out a little bit more. Also, you know, how are the voters contacted? Was it an online panel? Was it live callers? Was it text to web? All those things can have different implications. What's their likely voter model look like, right? What does the sample look like? Who's in that sample? If you see a poll in Florida and the likely voter model isn't at least +5 Republican, discount it. That's just the way it is in Florida nowadays. Also, you have to understand polling's limitations. If a poll comes out and it says it's, you know, 50 to 47 with 3% undecided, that tells me it's a really close race. And it may be 50 to 47. It may be 49 to 48. It may be 50 to 47 the other way. You need to think about polls as rusty butter knives and not scalpels. There are margins of error around those estimates mathematically that are real. And if you think about them in that way, oh, this is going to be a close race. You know, it could come down to turnout. Maybe there's a hurricane in one part of the state and people don't show up. If you think back to 2018, there was a big hurricane out in the Panhandle. Turnout dropped by 10 points in Bay County. You know, what does that do? You know, Bay County isn't the most populated county in the state, so it didn't make a huge difference, but it made a little bit of a difference. You know, what if something like that were to happen in Miami? Right? So there's a lot of things that can happen between now and an election that can impact that. And understanding polling at best is a rough estimate and not an exact precise point estimate. Will give you a better understanding about looking at these polls and interpreting them. So thank you. And I am open to any and all questions about this or polling in Florida or politics in Florida, whatever it happens to be. Yes, sir. We had Donna winning. We had her winning by, I want to say 2, and she ended up winning by 4, I think is the number was, something like that. No. So that's an interesting race in that she's one of the few Democrats that had, you know, extensive name recognition in the city, and people knew her. She did great with independents. And she also got enough Republicans. You know, she got Republican votes. This wasn't a circumstance where she relied on independents. There weren't a ton of independents in that race for the Deegan Davis race, but she got some Republican votes.
We have a question over here from our visitor, Jerry.
Jerry Kelly. So in 8 and 12, 538 and Nate Silver all of a sudden jumps the lead. And congratulations on his list. He has you listed as the 11th best poll in the country. In 16, Trafalgar got it right. But Trafalgar, that's like a 1 in a million. They've kind of been off on everything else. Morning Consult, they published that number, but behind it, it's you can't really tell what's going on. And it's like you said, it's a crosstabs, but they don't emphasize any of that. Where do we get the truth from, if there's such a thing as truth?
And you got to work for it. And that's part of the problem, right? And we see this with our work all the time. Our polls get quoted when they come out all over the place, and they'll release, a couple of quotes from the press release. That's really all that a given place has space for. If they're doing it right, they should be able to link to that press release, and it should have the methodological statement attached to it, theoretically. In that methodological statement, better organizations will detail how and what they're doing and how they got there. Some private organizations like Trafalgar, there's a lot of art in science, right? Another talk I do is kind of like the art and science of polling. There's a lot more art in those than there is science, and they don't, because they're profiting and they're selling their art, they're not particularly transparent about it.
Yeah, thanks for being here. John Runyon. How big is your staff? Are they paid or are they students? And are those students getting a degree in polling?
Yes, yes, and no. So I have 4 full-time staff members. I have an associate director who's been with me since day one, Andrew Hopkins. Eva Matthews is our research coordinator. She's been with us for, 5 years now. And we have an HR guy, and Joe Hyder. He's been with us for 4 years now. And then we have Rachel McDonald, who is kind of our leader of our interviewers. Our interviewers, we have a paid staff of interviewers that do a lot of our work. They're mostly students, but this is their job and we pay them. We do class projects where Introduction to American Government, for example, will have their students come in. We'll go to the class. We'll spend a class period talking about polling to them. They'll come to the lab. We'll train them up for an hour, and then we'll put them on the phones for projects. It's a real good hands-on experience for these kids. It does a couple of things. One, it introduces them to the behind the scenes, right? It gives them a sense about how this poll stuff actually works. You get to talk to people across the country or across the state. It's a wonderful experience for them. And on occasion, it reminds them that maybe studying for this test isn't the worst idea, because I don't want to do that for the rest of my life. So it's a little bit of everything is the answer. We don't have degrees in survey research necessarily, but I do occasionally offer a class in it.
Hey, Tom Schneider, good to have you here. I just noticed I've gotten 2 polls on text just in the time you've been talking today. So, and I'll say this, 8 years ago, I probably would have responded to some of those. Now I just go up and I delete the text and I also block the number. It looks like you're getting more of that just from one of the slides you had up there. What do you think the best way to poll is? What's your favorite way? What do you think the most effective way is these days?
The easiest way to poll is in person. However, that doesn't work great if you're doing a statewide poll or something like that. You just can't do that in Florida. We can do that for small events. Maybe if there's a local event in Jacksonville that is concerned about attendance and spending and what the economic impact is, those are great. Those are a lot of fun. Those are easy. What is the gold standard for polling, right? 40 years ago, it was random digit dial landlines. The problem you had then was oftentimes one type of person in the household would typically answer the phone, oftentimes the woman if it's a married couple. So you had trouble finding men. As cell phones came around, they were great because now everybody has a phone, and theoretically everybody now has an equal probability of getting sampled. The problem with that is, right, if you don't know the phone number now, you're not picking up. And as you get more of these texts, and more of them are not about actual polling, but they're designed to extract information or money from you, people are becoming. So it's a long answer to, I wish I knew. We do a little bit of everything. I still would lean toward the old fashioned dialing a telephone. We do leave voicemails. So if you don't answer our phone, we do leave a voicemail saying, hey, here's who we are, here's why we're calling. And then when we call them back, we're hopeful that maybe we can get them.
Yes. Judy Matheny, thank you so much for being here. I have participated in some polls in the past.
Thank
but
you.
I know, but I have not questioned who was polling me. Okay. And it wasn't the clear one. Are you voting for so-and-so? Are you voting for so-and-so? Yes, no, that kind of thing. But where I felt that they were leading me through the questions toward a particular determination. And I was always from the very first question trying to figure out, okay, where's their bias? Where is this coming from? Do you work on, and you did say that you're not, engaged with that, but I would imagine that there's quite an emotional and a science behind structuring the questions, particularly when you're forming them for political or any kind of, how people are really feeling about things.
Yes,
Can you-
1000%. Yes is yes, and yes is the answer, right? So we don't do work for political candidates. Let's be clear about that. And the answers that we try to put forth try to be the truth as best that we can tell it. But you're absolutely right. The frame of a survey instrument, even unintentionally, can get you to places. So for example, I would imagine most people here have an opinion on abortion. And I imagine it runs somewhere along the spectrum, right? No, under any circumstances, it's murder. Yes, under every circumstances, it's my body. I can do what I want with it. And everywhere in between. Give you a survey, ask that question, get the responses. If I start asking you questions about different health things and government interference in your health and those types of questions, and then I ask that abortion question, I'm going to see more responses over toward the pro-choice side. If I start asking you questions about kids and babies and those sorts of things, even if they're honest goodness questions, and then I ask you an abortion question, suddenly you're thinking about this very differently, and maybe your positions move a little bit. And that is a policy position that this country has been wrestling with since before most people in this room were alive, right? So that's something that we're pretty ingrained in us, even though, and you can still see movement. A lot of policies that get thrown at us oftentimes are new, and they are not in the political zeitgeist for generations. And we don't have a ton of information about them. So our opinions are malleable. So in those circumstances, you can really get wild swings. So the answer is yes, we care desperately about those sorts of things. A quick example, I remember some polling in Jersey a few years ago. I'm from Jersey, so I pay attention. But back when Chris Christie was in office, and it was his last election that he won, and there was 2 different polls that came out that had very different results. And the one poll was asking about people's most important problem before it got into the vote choice question. And you would do that to build trust with the respondent, to get them to think their opinions are important, build some rapport with, and then you can say, oh, how are you going to vote? Problem is, that one issue, whatever it was, Christie wasn't doing well on. So it got people thinking about their vote choice in terms of that issue. And so when they were on the phone, like, oh yeah, I'm not going to vote for him, I'm going to vote the other way. But then, a couple of weeks later, when the election comes, all these other things are in, and then they end up voting for Christie. So yeah, that stuff really matters, and we wrestle with that all the time.
Hey, Michael, over here, Michael Corrigan Jr., 2 questions. One is, when you're doing phone polling, do you get better responses from people if it's a female caller versus a male caller? And the second one is, if you don't mind, when were you involved in a polling that you just totally missed at the end?
So yes to the first question, and that's, who these callers are and the sound of their voice is meaningful. Some people are just better, and it's really difficult to pinpoint. They can say the same words to the person next to them. Our girl callers do a lot better because guys are more likely to stay on the phone with them because guys are pigs. But also, if women are potentially less threatened by a creepy guy's voice on the other end of the line. So our women do generally do better than men, although we have some excellent male callers. So polls that we shit the bed on, I think there's two, and I'll talk about them differently. The first one, and this was Angela Corey's race that she ended up losing to Melissa Nelson. We came out with our poll, and I think we had Melissa Nelson up like 20 or 25. And we're like, oh my God, this can't be right. We had to screw this up. I was terrified. I was like, well, it is what it is. We did it. We have to put it out there. And we were wrong, right? She ended up winning by like 35. But so that's one. The other one was the Democratic primary with Nikki Fried and Charlie Crist. And we did, again, you talked about modes of polling. We did an online poll for that one amongst, likely Democratic voters. And we had it as a really close race. It was like 5 points or something like that. Obviously, she ended up losing by like 30, right? She just got trounced. So we were really badly off there. And again, it comes down to the mode effect, and that's something to think about. The folks that are most likely to take a poll like that, where they're emailed out of the blue off your records and your voter file, tend to be more progressive, tend to be more invested. Those folks tend to be more in favor of Nikki Fried. The problem was there weren't very many of them in the entire electorate. And the other folks that were more supportive of Charlie Crist, we were not getting. So that's something that we missed on, that we learned on, and something that we're particularly cognizant about going forward.
Well, it looks like that. Oh, we have one more question in the back here. Let me work my way to him.
Carl Dawson, thanks again for being here. When I do answer a phone call and I don't know who it is, if there's a 3-second delay, I'll hang up.
Yes.
What's going on there?
So that's exactly right. So what happens is there's two different ways that you can live dial somebody. One is you were sitting on the phone, getting numbers punched in, or you click a button and it dials the numbers for you. And you're just waiting. You're hearing a ringing. Somebody picks up, they say hello, they say hello right back. That's expensive because our caller is sitting there waiting for the ring. That's how we operate. Another way to do it, which is much less expensive, is there's a dialer dialing your number. And as soon as you pick up, it then gets routed to an interviewer. That second or two that it takes to get connected to the interviewer, for the interviewer to click OK and then come on, you get lost. We don't do that. It's more expensive for us to do it that way, but we feel that we get a more representative group because the people that do pick up, we're able to capture them better.
President Tim, okay, you did stick around. I didn't know if you were going to leave also after the meeting. Turn it back over to you, sir.
I don't know if you all heard that, but Joe Springer said I should hide behind the signs, so I'd be lost too. And then Corrigan would have to get up here and tap dance for the rest of the meeting. Let's have a round of applause from Mike Bender. Hey, thank you. Thank you. You got a minute? Sure. Nobody asked about the opposition marketing.
Yes.
You brought up the marijuana. It's on the ballot. 65%, I think, in favor based on the last polling. How effective is the opposition? How much do you think that poll might change as a result of the negative advertising?
I think it can change a little bit. And I think and I studied direct democracy for my dissertation. Negative dollars are more effective than positive dollars when it comes to campaigns and ballot measures. For a lot of reasons, there's a status quo bias in some cases, but also, oftentimes there's a lot of fear mongering. And if you're voting yes, 95% of the times, that means there's a policy change that's going to be impacted. And if you can be fear mongered into saying, no, I'm scared of change, those things can help you. Now, the advertising for 4 has been much more aggressive than it has been for 3. And I think that's getting much more of the attention. So, I think the advertising for 4 will be more effective because there's been a lot more of it.
Great. Thanks again for being here. We got a gift for you. Come on over here. And we're going to take a picture. I thought we had a gift. We have a gift for for Mike, Patty?
A firm handshake and a good thank.
No, here it is right here. It was hidden.
Oh, there we go.
And let's get a picture, all right? Thank you. Right over here. Turn on the camera.
What a day.
Thank you, bud. All right, one more.
Great job. Great job.
Here is your form, the game, the fact that it's had, I also want to thank you.
Yes, please.
Our technical manager, Tiffany, for a great job. Mike Crumpler and Kate Bush were our greeters today. I was going to thank Mark Eldridge and Joe Eberly and Mike O'Brien, but they're not here, so I'm not going to thank them. And I want to thank Mike Bender again. I also, before we wrapped up, I had a note I wanted to read to you. This is a card that we received just this week. It says, "Dear Rotary Club of West Jacksonville, thank you for the beautiful flowers that you sent to me when my beloved passed on August 4th. How thoughtful and kind of your club to honor Phil so honorably. I've moved to Pensacola to be nearer to him. Fondly, Nancy Voss." Thank you all for what you've done for Phil and his family. All right. Our future meetings, we've got listed on your program. So please pay attention to those messages. And we're going to wrap up with the four-way test. Today we have Preston Keys. Is Preston here? He probably isn't here. Oh, this is amazing. This is so rich. Thank you very much. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thank you, everybody. And let's go make some magic. Have a great rest of your day. Hey, guy. You can't make this up. You cannot.